Robbins Barstow was a lifelong, passionate advocate for whales. During the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, he produced a series of documentary films about the plight of whales and the global movement to save them.
In the summer of 1987, Robbins and Meg Barstow of Wethersfield, Connecticut, enjoyed a great seagoing travel adventure. They went for a week-long whale watch on board the 95-foot schooner, the Harvey Gamage. Their port of embarkation was Boston, Massachusetts, and on Sunday afternoon, the 2nd of August, they made their way to Pier 7 in Boston Harbor for their first glimpse of the tall-masted vessel that was to be, for the next 6 nights and days, home for them and 30 other people, the place where they would eat, sleep, and share the adventure of life at sea. The Harvey Gamage is a well-equipped sailing ship which for a number of years has spent the summer months taking groups of passengers for educational and recreational cruises off the New England coast from Maine to Connecticut. Built in South Bristol, Maine in 1973, the Harvey Gamage has accommodations for up to 32 passengers and a crew of 7. When we arrived, it was moored at the dock, waiting to welcome the 24 passengers who had signed up for this particular whale watch voyage. Robbins was greeted by the cruise director, Eben Whitcomb, and it was quite a thrill to set foot for the first time on the broad deck of this illustrious voyager. It took all of us a little time to become oriented to the boat's various features, both on deck and below. Here at the wheel are Captain Steve King on the left and First Mate Glenn Roby. There were 2 other men and 1 woman crew members, and in addition 2 superb cooks. All kinds of food was being loaded aboard, and the chief cook wanted Meg to have an advanced introduction to one of the large lobsters which were to furnish us a delectable feast at sea the next evening. Sleeping aboard the boat that first night in our small staterooms with double bunks, we were somewhat cramped but nevertheless filled with anticipation for the adventure lying before us. Early the next morning, we got ready to cast off. The Harvey Gamage is 95 feet long on deck, 23.5 feet wide, and draws 9 feet 7 inches. Though primarily a sailing vessel, the Gamage also has a powerful engine, and after taking on fuel, the boat motored out through the buoys and other boats in the harbor and past the Boston breakwaters. As soon as we reached open ocean, the sails were raised, and we headed straight out to sea with a heavy breeze blowing. This first day was a strong introduction to what ocean-going sailing can really be like. It was raining a little, and salt spray was coming over the bow from the waves, so we put on our slickers and sat or stood around the foredeck, feeling the pull of the strong wind in the sails and watching the water rush by as the ship plowed into the waves and swells. There was great excitement sitting up in the bow when it rose way up in the air and then came crashing back down on the next wave. The horizon seemed to rise and fall as the boat moved up and down. This was dramatic and exhilarating sailing. We kept hoping to see whales as we got farther out, but the weather and water were so rough that this was not a very favorable circumstance for sighting cetaceans. It was, however, a great experience just being out there sailing along on the bounding main, and we spent almost the entire day under heavy sail heading east out into the Atlantic Ocean. There are two masts on the Harvey Gamage, the mainmast and the somewhat shorter foremast. The top of the mainmast towers 91 feet above the water. Like most schooners, the Gamage has 6 sails, a large mainsail whose boom extends back over the steering wheel, a somewhat smaller foresail on the less tall foremast, a staysail up front, and a jib at the bow, which is being raised here. The jib stretches from out on the tip of the bowsprit up to the top of the foremast and has to be kept taut to catch the wind. In addition, there are 2 smaller topsails that could be raised atop the 2 masts, though they were less frequently used. Our long sail this day took us all the way out to the north of Cape Cod and beyond Provincetown.
Well, Dr. Barstow, you see on this chart, we left Boston this morning in a little rainstorm, and we came on a course of 120 degrees right straight out to the eastward. Now that's 120 magnetic, which means we came just about like that, and then we, on the starboard tack, and then we tacked ship, and we're heading down here towards Provincetown right now, and pretty soon, if we look sharp, we'll see it coming up on the horizon. And we're heading in towards Provincetown, and any minute now, you just have to keep your eye peeled. Any minute now, we're going to see one of those rascals leap up to the surface.
Well, it was a great sail, but we still didn't see any whales that first day. As evening approached, heading for Provincetown, the sails were lowered, and we progressed a little more smoothly by motor past the tip of Cape Cod. Soon we were able to pick out in the distance the famous Pilgrim's Monument, and while on our way into the harbor, we were served a fabulous lobster dinner down below in the main cabin. The ship anchored for the night in Provincetown Harbor, and some of us were ferried into the dock in an outboard motor launch for a brief evening look at this fascinating town. The next morning the sun was shining brightly, and after an early breakfast we prepared to get underway again. The ship had an excellent crew, and they allowed the rest of us to pitch in and help with shipboard tasks from time to time. Raising the anchor was a major undertaking, requiring several hands and concerted cooperation. When the anchor was all the way up, it had to be snared and then lashed to the side of the bow to keep it from banging around when the boat was at sea. There was little wind this morning, so to get out around the tip of Cape Cod, we started out once more using the motor for power, with the sails not up. We had heard reports that whales were feeding further offshore this summer than they had in earlier years, so it was decided to go around the outside of Cape Cod and down in a southerly direction toward what is known as the Great South Channel. That morning we had a double seminar up on deck. First, Eben Whitcomb gave us a briefing on the course he was planning to follow, and then we had a talk about whales. Patricia Harcourt was the naturalist engaged for this week-long whale-watching excursion, and Patty presented some very interesting information about whales in general, and in particular the whales that we might expect to encounter here off Cape Cod. The most familiar and popular species of whale, which usually spends summers feeding in these waters, is the humpback whale. It grows to be up to 45 feet in length and has long white flippers and a strikingly beautiful pointed-tipped tail. Patty stationed herself in the rigging to keep a sharp lookout for any whales in this new area. The first thing that you see is what looks like a little white puff of smoke rising above the surface. That is the whale's spout, the condensed air being expelled from its lungs through 2 blowholes on the top of its head when it comes up to breathe. The first sighting is always especially exciting. Hail out!
You seen a white flipper? both of them. There's a fluke.
Tail's coming out? Almost.
Hey, vertical.
Here we are seeing two humpback whales, a large mother and her smaller calf. They're called humpbacks because of the way they hump their backs up above the water when they start to make a deep dive. Then as they dive, their tails usually come up above the surface and we can see the unique white and black markings on the underside. Watch carefully now, and in just a moment you will see the end of a breach, a whale that has leaped up out of the water and is crashing back down with a tremendous white splash. Watch now. There. That was the end of the breach. This doesn't happen very often, and it's very hard to catch on film. But when a breach does occur, a 45-foot, 40-ton animal hurling its whole body up out of the sea and splashing back down again, it is one of the most thrilling sights in all of nature. Well, having had that first exciting encounter with that pair of humpback whales, the boat continued under power with two new lookouts at the top of the foremast to see if any other whales were around. And they even let the filmmaker from Wethersfield take a trick at the wheel. To cool things off a bit, when the sun got very hot that afternoon, we used a hose to pump salt water from the ocean. Everybody put on their bathing suits, and we had great fun squirting the hose water over each other. It was shrieky cold, but refreshing and cleansing, though still salt sticky. Ocean water through the hose is usually used for scrubbing down the decks, but it's good for scrubbing down human bodies as well. And there's nothing quite like a good salt water shampoo. Another way to get a thorough rinsing off is to lower a bucket over the side on a rope, fill it with ocean water, and then dump it all at once over somebody's head. We're still heading south now, hoping to see more whales, using the motor to make better time since the wind was fairly light that day. We did find several other humpback whales, though most of them kept their distance from the boat this time. As soon as anyone shouts, "There she blows," everybody rushes over to the railing and gets their cameras ready, hoping one will come close enough to get a good picture. The pattern of black and white markings on the underside of each humpback whale is as unique and distinct as our human fingerprints. It's these vital, varied tail markings that enable scientists to recognize and distinguish individual whales. They even give names to particular humpbacks. To protect us from the sun as we continued our watching, a large awning was mounted on the middle deck, suspended from the foresail boom. Paddy Harcourt, our naturalist, was able to pick out 6 different humpback whales during this day's sightings. Most had a mixture of dark and white coloration, but this one's tail appeared to be almost all black. At the end of the afternoon, a heavy fog settled in. This brought about a change in our plans. Instead of continuing out to sea, it was decided to turn around and head back into the island of Nantucket. The lack of visibility over the water, however, did not interfere with a marvelous buffet dinner served up on the main deck under the awning. After getting a plateful, each passenger searched out a cozy spot on deck to sit and eat. The wind and the dampness of the fog made it a little chilly, but the food was fabulous. The foghorn was blown every 2 minutes to make our boat's presence known in the darkening mist. The captain followed a compass course during the night, and when we woke the next morning, we found ourselves safely anchored in Nantucket Harbor. We were surrounded by all sorts of other boats, big and small, and we found it a fascinating sight. Nantucket, of course, is an extremely interesting place, so actually this was a welcome opportunity to visit us. Most of us had never seen as many different boats in the water at one time as filled this extensive harbor. After breakfast, nearly everybody took the chance to ride into town in the ship's small outboard motor launch for a shore excursion, taking a look at the whaling museum, some of the historic houses, the cobblestone streets, and other picturesque attractions. So our fourth day was spent in Nantucket. The Harvey Gamage also had a small lifeboat dinghy, and at the end of the day, 2 of the crew members fitted it out with a makeshift sail to take a little fun voyage of their own. There was quite a heavy breeze by this time, and they just sailed all over the harbor and had a lot of fun. Everybody was cheering them on and hoping that they wouldn't bump into other boats, but they managed to steer around pretty well and kept that little single sail full. Here is a 2-hulled catamaran also enjoying the breeze. For a while, we thought our 2 crew members might be heading out to sea looking for Spain, or might even capsize, but they finally did return before nightfall to the main ship, safe and sound. That night, the Harvey Gamage remained anchored in Nantucket Harbor. The following day, we set out from Nantucket and headed west down along the southern coast of Cape Cod towards Woods Hole and Buzzards Bay as we made our way inside the island of Martha's Vineyard and then into more open water. A strong breeze arose and all sails were hoisted. Even the small triangular topsail was brought out and set way up on the top of the mainmast. We could feel the power of wind and water as our ship moved strongly through the waves. Our one female crew member, Susan, especially loved this kind of weather and steering at just the right angle into the wind. We had another briefing session on deck with Patty explaining our route.
Okay, we started out in Provincetown on Tuesday, went around the tip here, made our first sighting in this area. It sounded like a minke whale, and our first positive identification was made out here off of Nauset. We saw a pair of humpbacks, one of which breached, and we continued along our way down here pretty much parallel with the shipping lanes until fog settled about here. The plan was to head down to a deep area where we were likely to find sperm whales, but when fog settled, we headed west here and came into Nantucket. Today we're heading out from Nantucket, and we're planning to go around through Woods Hole, up through Buzzards Bay, and through Cape Cod Canal to put us in better position for finding whales tomorrow on the southern and eastern side of Stellwagen Bank.
From time to time, the boat had to tack or come about to take maximum advantage of the wind and make our way in zigzag fashion toward our destination. This was very satisfying sailing weather, enjoyed in different ways by different folks. Some just like to lie down and relax and roll with the ship. Others, like Meg Barstow, with a humpback whale embroidered on the back of her jacket, were eager to find just the right spot for the perfect snapshot. For Evan Whitcomb, our cruise director, this was a supremely happy day. It was just the kind of sail he loved to provide for his passengers. Now Meg Barstow is at the helm herself. What a thrill this is, with the wind pulling hard on the sails and blowing in your face as you strain at the wheel. It's not easy to keep so big a vessel going in just the right direction with this big a wind, but by keeping on turning the wheel with a little guidance from crew member Susan, she succeeds in maintaining the ship on course. And then we saw the Shenandoah passing by, one of the other great sailing ships of the North Atlantic, with 3 jibs in the bow and 2 square-rigged sails on the foremast. Our captain quickly decided to bring our ship about and to turn the Harvey Gamage all the way around so that we could sail back parallel to the Shenandoah. We wouldn't exactly engage them in a race because we knew their ship was considerably larger and had a lot more sail than we did. But what a thrill it was to sail along beside them. Our crew kept trimming our sails to try to keep up with them. We loved watching their ship, and we knew that to them our ship would be just as stunning a sight. Here were these 2 beautiful big sailing ships speeding along in tandem, leaning over into the wind, both under full sail. People on both boats were shouting and waving across the water, and we were all taking pictures of each other. This was truly one of those exceedingly rare, great moments at sea. It is difficult to express the exhilaration we experienced out there on the blue water, seeing what sailing ships are built to do and sharing for one brief shining moment one of life's greatest wonders and joys. Along came a white-sailed catamaran, wanting to get a classic double photo of the Harvey Gamage and the Shenandoah together. Eventually, the Shenandoah pulled too far ahead of us for us to continue contact. So the captain came about again, and we continued on our westerly course. Now the sun came out and made even more glorious this magnificent hour of sailing strong and free. The waves were not too large, and as the water rushed by with the white foam and spray lit up by the sun, we were privileged to experience the ultimate heaven for sail lovers. It was an absolutely perfect time on the water, with an ideal combination of sun and wind and spray and sea. We were on this great, beautiful schooner, the boat leaning over with all its sails full, cruising along at about 7 knots an hour. It was the kind of day that sailors dream of forever, but rarely see actually come to ideal fulfillment. It was just a superb experience, which each of us enjoyed supremely in our own way. In due time, we made our way into Buzzard's Bay, through the break in the small chain of offshore islands known as Woods Hole, and we headed into the harbor of the small coastal town of Mattapoisett. Here we dropped anchor for the night, not far from the south entrance to the Cape Cod Canal, and a number of us took advantage of a little free time before dinner to put on our bathing suits and go in for a saltwater swim right off the boat. There's something about swimming in the ocean that's different from swimming in a pool, even if it is in a harbor such as this one. At any rate, those of us who did go in here found it cool and refreshing, and we had fun finding as many different ways as we could to get into the water. Some of us even dove off the railing. In any case, it certainly whetted our appetites for dinner that night. While these hardy souls were sporting around in the cold and salt water beside the boat, down in the tiny one-stove galley, another miracle was in the making. Our two master shipboard cooks were preparing one of the most scrumptious meals I think any of us had ever had. When the dinner bell rang, it was worth scrambling back on board for. The feast was New England turkey, not just one, but two, with all the trimmings. Eben cut out the entire side of each breast before he started carving them. We all lined up on deck and had this marvelous, marvelous meal, just sitting around and eating wherever we wanted to. After dinner that night, some of us did go ashore to explore the old shipbuilding town of Mattapoisett. The next morning, our voyage was going to take us up through the Cape Cod Canal and under 3 bridges. There are still actually 3 bridges over the canal. The first bridge is an older bridge, a drawbridge, with a roadway that is raised when it's time for boats to go under it, and then it's lowered again for cars and trains to go across it. We found in the canal some of those great big cruise boats that were floating hotels. Now we're coming up to the second of the bridges here. This is the Bourne Bridge, going from Bourne over the lower part of Cape Cod down near Falmouth on its way to Hyannis. This is really quite impressive. These bridges were built in the 1930s to give greater access to Cape Cod. As they cover the canal, we're going under the bridge now, and you can see it towering way up above our tall mast. The bridges had to be constructed large enough so that heavy traffic, tall ships, great cruise ships, and the freighters could make their way underneath them. Cape Cod had only been connected to the mainland by some low drawbridges over the canal before these new bridges were built, new back in the 30s. Here's the next one now. This is the Sagamore Bridge up at the north end of the canal. And again, it's a thrill to look up and see the bridge pass overhead as our masts go underneath. Now here we've got another one of these great big hotel luxury cruise ships. Maybe momentarily, when we thought about the cramped quarters down below on our sailboat, some of us may have thought, wouldn't it be nice to be on the Ocean Princess? But I'm sure that there's no one who was there on the Harvey Gamage for the whole week who would have really wanted to change places. Because being on a schooner like this, under sail in the open sea, is its own special reward. And now we're up in the Cape Cod Bay area again, and we're trying to see if there aren't some more whales up here. We're heading out towards what they call Stellwagen Bank, an underwater plateau. And it looks as if we may be going to find some. There it is. Okay, we've got another humpback. You can also tell a humpback sometimes by the greenish white of the long flippers that show under the water. If we don't get too good a view of the underside of the tail, we can't identify it. But Patty had a list of the different whales that people have identified over the years, and they keep coming back there time after time. So it's always fun to see if you can recognize an old friend. We had 3 lookouts in the rigging at this time. Now you may be able to see some of the flippers here. There's the long, broad back, but the little whitish looking under the surface, I think there's a whale going to come up to the surface. There it is. It spouts, it breaks the surface. There's the 2 blowholes in the dorsal fin on the back. There's a tail now as it goes down. Well, we had a wonderful afternoon of whale watching out there off Stellwagen Bank. Here's one again. I don't know if it's the same one 3 times or 3 different ones. But again, you get that spout in the back and then finally the tail coming out when it dives down deeply. We found there were other boats out there with us here now. We were in the place where the whale watching boats from Plymouth and Boston and Provincetown go. And then we encountered another kind of whale that we hadn't seen before. Here was a different kind of spout, a taller spout. It's by a larger whale known as a finback whale. The finback whale is second only to the blue whale. They grow to be 60 or 70 feet long, and it really is a tremendously impressive sight to see the great big, long, broad back and tiny little pointed dorsal fin of a finback whale. The most famous of the whale watching cruises, the boats that go out for just one day and just for whale watching, is the Dolphin Fleet. This is the 6th member of that fleet, the 6th boat built just for whale watching from Provincetown. This is the Dolphin 6th. And they have a big crowd there, as you can see. They're totally a power ship, of course, not a sailboat. But it was fun to encounter them, and we know a lot of the people that go out on the Dolphin, a lot of the crew, Captain Aaron Avalar and others, so it's always fun to encounter them and exchange greetings at sea. As it got late in the evening, the other boats had to head back into port, but our ship was going to be staying. We decided actually that the boat would stay out under sail all night. So we had these evening farewells as the whales dived down to say goodbye to us. As the sun was setting in the west, you could see this broad back of a whale moving through the bright lights of the setting sun on the water. It was really kind of romantic. The last evening at sea for everybody aboard. We slept there on the boat at sea that night, gently rocking, and then the next morning when we got up, we found that they had sailed back a good part of the way into Boston Harbor. So here we were on our last day, sailing home to old New England.
Rolling home, rolling home, rolling home across the sea. Rolling home to old New England. Rolling home, dear land to thee. All hands, the man, the captain, see the cable running clear. Heave away with the Wilmy boys, for New England we will steer. Rolling home, rolling home, rolling home across the sea. Rolling home to old New England. Rolling home, dear land to thee.
For this last day, the cooks had prepared one final treat for us, a tray full of sugar and cinnamon buns. Boy, did they taste good. Approaching Boston Harbor, we could see buoys and other boats and land up ahead. Here we were, returning now to civilization after 6 days of living by ourselves on this boat at sea. We got into the harbor, but then we looked up and we saw this great airplane. Quite a contrast between old and new modes of traveling. And as our trip ended, we all gathered in the back deck for 3 big cheers.
Yes! Harvey yes! Harvey yes!
And so ends another Barstow travel adventure.
More of Robbins Barstow's whale documentaries are available on the BTA Films channel on YouTube. Click here to subscribe or follow these links to other films by a master of home movie storytelling in the pre-digital era.